Her grandmothers spat at her feet, and men who had once eaten in her father's house pointed trembling fingers and shouted that she had brought death into their homes. Someone broke an egg over her hair. Someone else rubbed white chalk across her forehead in the sign they used for cursed things. A little boy, no older than 7, threw a stone so small it barely hurt. But what made the girl lower her eyes was not the sting of the stone. It was the fact that the boy's mother smiled when she saw him do it, as if cruelty had become the village's first lesson, and mercy its forgotten language. The girl's name was Amara. She was 19 years old, thin from a life of giving away the food she barely had, and the people of Odimba had not called her by her real name in years. To them, she was the witch's child, the cursed daughter, the girl whose shadow spoiled harvests and whose silence meant she was speaking to spirits. But above the crowd, seated beneath a wide indigo umbrella, the richest woman in the district watched with a look too calm for an innocent heart. Lady Yejidi did not join the shouting. She did not need to. She had planted the first lie many seasons ago, and once a lie learns how to breathe, it can walk through a whole village without help. She alone knew that the girl in the dust was no witch. She alone knew why Amara's mother had died in fire, why Amara's father had disappeared in chains, and why every voice in Odimba had been trained to fear the child who should have inherited the most valuable land in 3 provinces. What Lady Yejidi did not know was that before that same day ended, a royal horse would stop in the market road. A prince would hear the orphan girl speak only one sentence, and the secret that had ruled Odimba for 17 years would split open in broad daylight, like a rotten calabash. The shouting grew louder when the village diviner raised his iron staff and declared that another child had fallen sick in the night, and that the fever had followed Amara's path. "She fetched water before dawn," he cried, "and before midday, little Sifu was burning like a coal. How many more signs do you people need?" The crowd answered him with fear, because fear does not ask for evidence when it is hungry. It only asks for a victim. Amara looked up then, not at the diviner, not at the people who mocked her, but at the mud wall near the square where the first light had touched the painted marks her mother used to redraw every planting season. She remembered hands gentler than any she had known since. She remembered a voice telling her, when she was small enough to sleep across one lap, that truth can be buried for a while, but never forever, because truth is like a root under stone. It waits. It pushes. It cracks what thinks it can hold it. "Speak!" shouted the diviner. "Confess what spirit sent you!" But Amara said nothing, and silence made the villagers angrier than tears would have. There are some people who can tolerate suffering only if the sufferer breaks in front of them. Amara's refusal to collapse made them feel accused. "She is proud," one man hissed. "Look at her. Even now she is proud." But the truth was simpler than pride. Amara had cried out all her tears years ago, on the night she watched her mother's hut burn, while the door was barred from outside and no one in the village came to open it. Since that night, grief had settled deep inside her. Not dead, not healed, just quieter than before. To understand why the people of Odimba feared her, you must go back to a season when the granaries were full, when her father, Mazi Kellen, still walked with the confidence of a man whose name meant honesty, and when Amara still believed adults always knew the difference between evil and power. Kellen had once served as record keeper for the old district council. He could read the trademarks burned into leather, count tribute without using his fingers, and remember the boundary stones of every family farm from the river bend to the outer forest. Poor farmers trusted him because his scales were always fair. Widows trusted him because he wrote their names into tax rolls exactly as they were spoken and never invented debts to enrich himself. Even the king's traveling officials trusted him, which was why Lady Yejide hated him. For behind her expensive wrappers and charitable smiles, Lady Yejide had built her fortune by stealing grain from communal stores, shrinking market weights, bribing scribes, and slowly swallowing the lands of families too poor to challenge her. When Kellen discovered that she had falsified the tribute ledgers and moved a boundary line to claim the Black Soil Valley belonging to Amara's mother's family, he refused to sign the revised records. He told her he would present the originals when the royal auditors came after the rains. That was the moment Lady Yejide decided not merely to ruin him, but to erase him. First came whispers that his wife knew forbidden herbs.
Then came rumors that chickens died after pecking near their fence. Then a child suffered seizures from bad water, and a midwife, paid in secret, said she had seen strange marks outside Kellen's compound. A village already eager for a story chose the easiest one. They did not ask who spread it first. They did not ask why every rumor seemed to help only one household. They only watched as fear did its work. One moonless night, soldiers from the district court arrived with 2 masked witnesses and accused Kellen of stealing tribute and using medicine to bind the tongues of elders. He laughed when he first heard the charge, because some lies are so large they sound foolish. But he stopped laughing when they produced ledgers bearing his seal and false entries written in a hand like his own. He looked toward the assembly and saw Lady Yejide lowering her eyes in practiced sorrow. He understood then that facts alone would not save him. He was taken away before dawn. Amara, barely 2 years old, clung to her mother's wrapper and watched the dust rise behind the men who led him away. He never returned. Some said he died on the road to the provincial prison. Some said he escaped and abandoned his family. Some said spirits took him because the ancestors punish dishonest men. The only person who knew the full truth was Lady Yejide, and she buried that truth where she believed no child could ever dig it up. After Kellen vanished, life in Odimba hardened against his family. Work disappeared. Greetings stopped. Children were warned not to share bowls with Amara. Her mother, Neka, sold firewood, mended baskets, and kept one small leather pouch hidden in the roof that she never let anyone touch. Whenever Amara asked about it, Neka would smile too quickly and say, "One day, when God decides the hour, this will speak for us." But before that day came, flames swallowed their hut. Amara remembered smoke before she remembered screaming. She remembered her mother pushing her through the rear gap in the wall. She remembered trying to crawl back toward the doorway and finding a chain looped through the outside latch. She remembered seeing a shadow run from the hut and hearing a woman's voice in the dark say, "Let the story end tonight." By sunrise, the villagers were saying that Neka had burned in her own ritual fire. No one mentioned the chain. No one mentioned that the leather pouch had vanished. And from that morning, people stopped calling Amara by the name her parents gave her. She became the girl from the cursed house. Years turned her into the village's unpaid servant and permanent suspect. If goats wandered, people blamed her shadow. If babies cried when she passed, mothers made protective signs. Yet Amara never became what they named her. She fetched water for the blind potter. She pounded yam for old Mama Shad when the woman's wrists swelled in harmattan. She sat through long nights beside sick children whose parents would not touch her by day, but accepted her help in darkness when fear and desperation became neighbors. In all those years, only a few people ever showed her something like kindness, and even they offered it in whispers,
as though compassion itself required hiding. Mama Shad once pressed roasted groundnuts into her hand and murmured, "Your mother was cleaner than all these mouths put together." An old drummer named Boro, who had been young when Kellen was taken, avoided saying much, but whenever Amara passed his doorway, he would stop his hands and look at her with the heaviness of a man who knew silence had a cost. The village diviner, however, hated Amara's existence, because every time she helped the sick with simple herbs her mother had taught her, people needed him a little less. He joined Lady Yejide in keeping the curse story alive, and together they turned suspicion into structure. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Word spread across Odimba that Prince Jabari, only son of the aging king of Arondi, was traveling through the district to inspect trade abuses, hear petitions, and choose a young woman from among several noble households to join the royal court during the new yam season. By midday, every ambitious family in the district had started braiding daughters' hair and polishing bracelets. Lady Yejide boasted that her niece, Layo, would surely catch the prince's eye. Traders swept their stalls, drummers repaired torn skins. Even those who had spent years complaining about royal taxes suddenly remembered how to smile when power was near. Amara cared little for princes. Royal men had ridden through Odimba before and never paused long enough to notice who ate and who starved. She woke before dawn on the prince's arrival day, tied her wrapper tight, and carried 2 clay pots toward the far spring because Mama Shad's knees had swollen badly and there was no one else to fetch water for her. The village square was already crowded by the time she returned. Horns sounded, dust rose. Children shouted and ran behind the mounted guards. Prince Jabari rode at the front on a dark horse with a narrow white line down its face. He was younger than Amara expected, perhaps 27, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, wearing no excessive jewelry except a single brass arm ring engraved with the royal seal. What set him apart was not splendor, but attention. He looked at faces, not only gifts. He noticed the old, not just the decorated. And when a little child stumbled into the path of his horse, it was Amara, not any noble daughter, who dropped her water pot and lunged forward to drag the boy out of danger. The child rolled clear, but the clay pot burst against a stone, and cold water sprayed across the prince's robe and saddle. A silence fell so suddenly, it felt as if the whole square had inhaled and forgotten how to release the breath. Lady Yejide stood first. "Seize her," she said, and though she was not royal, men moved at once. "This is the cursed one, the witch's child. She has defiled the prince." Amara did not beg. 2 guards seized her arms, and the frightened child she had saved began to cry. Prince Jabari looked first at the weeping boy, then at the broken pot, then at the girl being restrained. "Did she push the child into danger?" he asked quietly. "Or pull him out of it?" No one answered. Lady Yejide stepped forward with a sorrowful tilt of her head. "Your Highness, pity must not blind wisdom. This girl brings calamity wherever she goes. We have endured her darkness for years." The prince turned to Amara. "What is your name?" Few questions in life are as powerful as being asked your name by someone who expects the truth to matter. Amara lifted her chin. "Amara, daughter of Kellen and Neka." The old drummer Boro, standing at the back of the crowd, dropped his stick. It struck the ground with a sound too small for most people to notice, but Prince Jabari noticed. So did Mama Shade. So, for the briefest instant, did Lady Yejide, whose fingers tightened around her wrapper,
before she smoothed her expression again. "Daughter of Kellen," the prince repeated. "The former record-keeper?" Lady Yejide answered too fast. "A disgraced thief and sorcerer, my prince. It is an old stain best forgotten." But Prince Jabari did not take his eyes off Amara. "If I had not seen it myself," he said, "I might have believed she attacked me. Instead, I saw her save a child and lose her water doing it. Release her." The guards obeyed. Murmurs rippled through the square. Lady Yejide smiled, but it was the smile of someone whose plans had been delayed, not destroyed. Prince Jabari rode on, yet he looked back once before turning toward the guest compound, and Amara felt something dangerous awaken in the air around her. Not hope, exactly. Hope is hard to trust when it has betrayed you before. But attention. And attention, in a place built on lies, is often the beginning of judgment. That evening, Prince Jabari asked for the district tribute ledgers, an unusual request for a ceremonial visit. He asked who maintained the old boundary archives. He asked whether Kellen's case records still existed. The local clerk stammered that termites and damp had ruined many documents over the years. The prince asked to inspect them anyway. By torchlight, in a record hut that smelled of mold and goat skin, he found carelessness where he had expected disorder. Pages were missing, not randomly, but selectively. Entries around the Black Soil Valley had been scraped and rewritten. One old leather strip, too faded for most to bother with, still carried the earlier mark of ownership beneath the revision. The land now taxed under Lady Yejide's name had once belonged to Neka's family. Prince Jabari traced the marks twice and said nothing. The next morning he visited Mama Sade under the pretense of checking on village elders. The old woman, bent like a wind-beaten tree but sharp as a needle, served him bitter tea and watched him over the rim of her cup. "They say you know old things," he told her. "Old things know me," she replied. "Whether people admit it depends on what they are hiding." He asked her about Kellen. She stared at the doorway for so long he thought she might refuse. Then she said, "Your father wears a crown. Ask him how many villages fear truth more than thunder. Kellen was not loved because he made cheating difficult. When he vanished, some of us noticed that the richest house in Odimba became richer." "And Neka?" the prince asked. Mama Sade's eyes darkened. "Her hut burned from outside inward. Fire does not chain its own door." That one sentence moved the matter from suspicion to purpose. Prince Jabari sent 2 trusted guards to inspect the ruined site of Kellen's old compound beyond the cassava fields. Nothing remained of the hut but charred posts and a collapsed cooking stand. But buried near the rear wall, they found rusted chain links fused together by old heat. Nearby, beneath a stone, one guard uncovered a brass weight stamped with the district market seal and shaved at the bottom so it measured light. When the prince held it in his palm that evening, he understood that greed had walked beside the curse story from the beginning. Yet missing ledgers and false weights were not enough to break a lie fortified by years. He needed witnesses, and witnesses in frightened villages do not step forward. They must be found where shame has hidden them. He found the first in Boro, the drummer. At first, the old man denied knowing anything. Then, Prince Jabari placed the rusted chain on the mat between them, and Boro's shoulders sagged as though he had been carrying invisible water for 17 years. "I heard the chain that night,"
he whispered.
I was drunk, but not deaf. I heard it strike metal. I heard Neka scream. I came as far as the banana grove and saw 2 men running. One was the diviner's brother. The other wore Lady Yajide's red hunting cloth. I told myself if the ancestors wanted justice, they would send it without me. Cowards say many holy things to decorate their fear. He wept then, not loudly, but like a leaking roof that has held back too much rain. The second witness came from somewhere no one expected. The sick child, whose fever had triggered Amara's public humiliation, little Sifu, recovered rapidly after Amara quietly told his mother to stop drawing water from the eastern well and instead boil water from the spring. Prince Jabari heard of it and ordered the eastern well examined. At the bottom, wrapped in reeds, the palace physician found a bundle of bitter root and black seed used in small doses for animal treatment, but poisonous when left to leach into drinking water. The village diviner claimed evil spirits must have placed it there. The physician laughed without humor. "Spirits tie cleaner knots than this," he said. Under questioning, the well-keeper confessed that the diviner had instructed him to ignore strange packets thrown in after dark because some medicines must not be disturbed. Suddenly, the sicknesses blamed on Amara had a different face. Prince Jabari began to see the shape of the plot. Poison the well nearest the poor quarter, let children fall ill, then point at the orphan girl who moved among the sick. Fear would do the rest. But Lady Yajide was not idle while the prince investigated. A mind that builds lies is always listening for footsteps. By the 3rd day, she knew enough to panic. She sent gifts to the guest compound. She invited the prince to a private meal. She pressed her niece Lio into silk and told her to laugh softly and speak little. Jabari declined the meal, accepted no gifts, and asked instead for a public council on market fairness. That request told Lady Yajide everything, so she made her boldest move. Near midnight, one of her maidservants slipped into the small shelter behind Mama Shade's courtyard where Amara slept and hid a wrapped bundle beneath her sleeping mat. At dawn, the bundle was discovered by the diviner in front of half the village: a carved fertility figurine, a pouch of grave dust, and a gold ankle bell bearing the crest of the late queen's household, an item so rare that mere possession could invite execution. Gasps spread like sparks in dry grass. "There!" cried Lady Yajide, in a performance so elegant it nearly deserved applause. "How many signs do we need before this wickedness is named?" She pretends kindness while serving darkness.
Amara looked at the objects as if they belonged to a stranger's dream. "They are not mine," she said. "And if I wanted to hide them, why would I place them under the mat where I sleep?" That question should have mattered. In many villages, however, accusation arrives dressed as logic and leaves as law. The crowd surged again. Prince Jabari, summoned at once, entered the courtyard to find fear on one side, triumph pretending to be outrage on the other, and Amara standing in the middle as she had stood all her life, alone but unbent. "No one touches her," he said. His voice was not loud, but authority need not shout when it is real. He looked at the gold ankle bell, then at Lady Yajide. "Curious," he said. "A relic from the late Queen's household appears in the bed of a girl who owns 1 wrapper and 2 bowls." Lady Yajide bowed her head. "Evil hides in poverty as easily as wealth, my prince." "Yes," he said, "but clumsy evil often hides in haste." He turned to his guards. "Bring me the maid called Tima." Panic flashed in Lady Yajide's eyes before she could bury it. Tima had already been stopped at the edge of the compound by guards who noticed ash on her feet, from the route behind Mama Sade's fence. Faced with the prince, the chain, the false market weight, the poisoned well packet, and the promise that the royal court punished servants less harshly for truth than mistresses for treachery, Tima collapsed into sobs and confessed that Lady Yejide had ordered her to hide the objects before dawn. The courtyard erupted. Some shouted that Tima lied out of fear. Some shouted that Amara had been framed. The diviner tried to slip away and was seized before he reached the gate. Under harsher questioning, he admitted knowing about the bitterroot packets in the well, though he still insisted he had only followed instructions for the safety of the village. Fear always changes its name when caught. By then, Prince Jabari had enough to demand a full assembly under royal authority. The gong sounded at midday. Every household in Odimba gathered beneath the Iroko tree, where judgments older than memory had once been spoken fairly. Lady Yejide arrived draped in expensive mourning blue, as if already grieving the insult of being suspected. Her niece, Leo, cried beside her on cue. The diviner stood guarded and pale. Amara wore the plainest wrapper in the square, but for the first time in many years, no one dared force her to kneel. Prince Jabari stood before them with the local magistrate at his right, and the palace physician, clerk, and 2 royal guards behind him. "This village," he began, "has used the language of curses to hide the fingerprints of greed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He lifted the altered market weight and set it against the official royal measure. Even from a distance, people saw the difference. Traders began shouting at once. Women who had lost profits for years slapped their thighs in anger. Next, he held up the scraped ledger strip showing the original boundary marks of the Black Soil Valley. Then he called Boro, who trembled but spoke. He told of hearing the chain on Neka's burning door and of seeing men flee in Lady Yejide's cloth colors. He confessed his silence and asked the ancestors to judge him after death if the village would not judge him now. Then came the well-keeper, then Tima the maid, then the palace physician explaining how the poisoned packets had made children sick and how Amara's advice to use boiled spring water had saved little Sifu, the very child whose fever had been used to condemn her. With each witness, Lady Yejide's composure thinned. Still she fought. She called Boro a drunk. She called Tima an ungrateful liar. She said the ledger marks were old and confusing. She insisted enemies envied her success. Then Prince Jabari asked the question she had hoped no one would know to ask. "Where," he said, "is the leather pouch taken from Neka's roof on the night her hut burned?" The square fell still enough to hear a baby breathe. Lady Yejide's face changed. Not much, just enough. Too much. "I do not know what you mean," she said. Jabari nodded to a guard, who stepped forward carrying a small iron box recovered that morning from a storage room in Lady Yejide's private granary. Inside lay a smoke-darkened leather pouch, cracked with age, but intact. Inside the pouch were 3 things. The original tribute entries signed by Kellen, a lineage strip proving Neka's maternal claim to the Black Soil Valley, and a letter from a prior royal auditor requesting a quiet inquiry into market theft complaints linked to Lady Yejide's household. It was not merely greed now. It was evidence suppressed through arson, false accusation, and probable murder. Lady Yejide reached for dignity and found only fury. "And if I did keep it," she shouted at last, "what then? That fool Kellen would have destroyed order. He would have stripped wealth from the only house strong enough to lead this district. The poor are always poor. Give them land and they sell it. Give them truth and they trade it for palm wine. I built Odimba's prosperity." There, in her own arrogance, the final confession came.
no spirit, no curse. Just the old disease of power, believing itself wiser than justice.
The magistrate did not wait for more. By royal order, Lady Yejide was stripped of her district privileges, her market authority, her estates pending full crown review, and every claim she had laid on the Black Soil Valley. The diviner lost his office and was taken in chains to answer for collusion and false incitement. Compensation from Lady Yejide's granaries was ordered for traders cheated with false weights. The eastern well was sealed until purified, and before the whole assembly, the magistrate declared Amara, daughter of Kellen, and Neka, fully cleared of every accusation of witchcraft, theft, or spiritual corruption ever laid against her family. Yet the moment that broke Odimba's spine was not the sentence. It was what happened next. Prince Jabari stepped down from the platform, crossed the dust between power and suffering, and stopped before Amara, where all could see. Then, to the shock of the entire village, he bent one knee to the ground. Some people gasped, others covered their mouths. A prince does not kneel lightly, especially not before someone the crowd spent years calling cursed. He held out the leather pouch with both hands. "Amara," he said, "for years this village used your pain as a wall behind which thieves hid. I cannot return the childhood they stole. I cannot unburn your mother's house or reopen your father's eyes. But before God, ancestors, and these witnesses, I return your family's name, your mother's land, and the truth your father died protecting." Amara did not reach for the pouch at first. Her lips trembled, and for the first time since she was a child, tears came without permission. Not small tears, not graceful tears. The kind that shake the chest because sorrow that has lived too long does not know how to leave politely. Mama Sade began to cry with her. Boro covered his face. Even some of the women who had spat at Amara that morning lowered their heads in shame. The little boy who had thrown the small stone clung to his mother's leg and whispered, "Is she not bad?" The mother had no answer, because truth had finally made fear look stupid. Amara took the pouch in both hands and pressed it to her chest. "My father used to say," she whispered, "that lies travel on horses, but truth walks barefoot and still arrives." Prince Jabari looked up at her, and there was no pity in his face now, only respect. "Walk no more alone," he said. In the weeks that followed, Odimba learned that justice is not a speech, but a reordering. Surveyors restored the true boundaries of the Black Soil Valley to Amara. The stolen grain stores were opened to widows, laborers, and families who had gone hungry while Lady Yejide hosted feasts.
The king's court sent new clerks to rebuild the tax records from surviving documents and witness testimony. The purified eastern well was reopened only after the palace physician approved it. As for the people of Odimba, some apologized to Amara directly, some through gifts left at Mama Saad's door, and some not at all, because pride can outlive proof. Amara accepted what she wished, refused what felt false, and never once used her restored position to humiliate those who had humiliated her. That, more than any decree, unsettled them. Cruel people understand revenge better than grace. Prince Jabari remained in Odimba longer than protocol required. Officially, he supervised the land transfer and corruption review. Unofficially, he found reasons to pass by the valley where Amara now worked with hired hands to plant cassava, okra, and groundnut along the fertile ridges her mother once described. He saw how she listened before speaking, how children who had once hidden from her
now followed her through the fields. How she kept the first harvest aside for families with no seed. One evening, at sunset, as birds stitched dark lines across the orange sky, Jabari found her standing near the restored boundary stone, her fingers tracing the old family mark cut into it decades before she was born. "Most people who suffer what you suffered," he said, "would spend the rest of life trying to make others feel small." Amara gave a tired half-smile. "Then let it shame the village that an outcast learned kindness faster than they learned justice." He laughed softly, then grew serious. "The court in Arondi needs eyes that do not fear powerful liars. My mother needs a daughter wise enough to argue with princes. And I—" He stopped, which surprised even him. "And you?" Amara asked. The breeze lifted the edge of her wrapper. "And I have not stopped thinking of the girl who saved a child, while a whole square prepared to condemn her." He did not rush the next words. "Come to Arondi. Not as a servant, not as a symbol, as yourself. If, in time, affection grows where respect already lives, I will count it among God's mercies. If not, the offer remains. Stand where truth is needed." Amara looked across the valley that had cost her family everything and had now come back carrying their names. "All my life," she said, "people decided what I was before I spoke. A curse, a burden, a warning. I will not exchange that prison for a prettier one." Jabari bowed his head. "Then choose freely." She studied him long enough to test whether power would punish honesty. At last she said, "I will come, but I will walk beside you, never behind you." The prince smiled in the fading light.
"That," he said, "is the only way I would want it."
In the months that followed, songs traveled farther than scandal ever had. The story spread from Odimba to river markets, from river markets to palace courtyards, from courtyards to distant compounds, where mothers told daughters that being hated by liars is not the same as being wrong. Children who once called Amara witch now called her Lady of the Valley. Mama Shade moved into a new courtyard with a shaded porch and complained daily that prosperity made everyone lazy. Boro played drums at the first harvest festival Amara hosted and wept openly when she asked him to begin the songs in her father's honor. Little Sifu, the feverish boy whose sickness had sparked the final accusation, grew strong and followed Amara everywhere until his mother finally laughed and said, "If you love her so much, at least help carry water." And Lady Yejide? She was sent away to a distant settlement under crown watch, where no servants rushed to answer her voice, and no fearful villagers mistook wealth for virtue. Some say her greatest punishment was not the loss of property, but the loss of audience. Lies hate empty rooms. When the new Yam Festival came again the following year, Amara stood in Arondi, not among decorated girls being inspected like cloth in a market, but beside Queen Mother Safia herself, reviewing petitions from widows and traders. Prince Jabari entered the great court in full ceremonial dress, yet when his eyes found Amara, there was still that same look from the day in Odimba. Not rescue, not ownership, but recognition. Before nobles, clerks, generals, and envoys, he asked permission to speak plainly. The Queen Mother smiled, as if she had waited months for the theater of it. Jabari crossed the court and, once again, knelt. This time the gesture did not apologize for injustice. It honored survival. "Amara, daughter of Kellen and Neka," he said, You came to us carrying ashes that were never yours, and turned them into bread for others. You brought truth where men of rank brought excuses. If you will have me, I ask not for your gratitude, but for your hand, your counsel, and your equal voice for the rest of my life." The hall held its breath. Amara looked at the Queen Mother, who nodded once. She looked at Mama Sade, who was pretending not to cry and failing badly. She looked at the prince, who stayed on one knee not because tradition demanded it, but because respect did. Then she said the one word that made the whole court erupt like rain on a tin roof. "Yes." But if you think this story is about a prince rescuing a poor girl, you have listened with only half an ear. Princes come and go. Crowns rise and fall.
What changed Odimba was not romance. It was the day a village learned that the person they called cursed had been the only one among them brave enough to remain kind while cruelty was fashionable. It was the day hidden records spoke, poisoned water confessed, and a chained door from long ago finally found its witnesses. It was the day a girl the world tried to rename took back the name her parents gave her and made it heavier than fear. Remember this when crowds become confident. Remember this when powerful people explain why injustice is necessary. Remember this when someone poor is accused too quickly and someone rich is believed too easily. A lie can eat for many years at a full table. It can wear silk. It can lead prayers. It can even teach a village which child to hate. But truth has a strange endurance. It survives in old chains, in forgotten ledgers, in guilty memories, in poisoned wells, in children who recover, in the silence of those who finally decide they are more tired of cowardice. Press the subscribe button for many new untold African folktales, only on Untold African.